Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome, people. Hope you guys had a beautiful week. I cannot wait to introduce you guys to the next guest. Before I do, just a few housekeeping things. If you love the Studio 78 podcast, do me a huge favor and head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate me 5 stars. If you're on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up. And of course, wherever you're listening, please hit the subscribe button. And when you find an episode that resonates with you, sharing is caring, my friend. So please share it on all the things, Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram. It helps people discover the podcast, which helps with the ratings and all that good stuff. And every share helps so much. So thank you to everyone who's done that already. Also, if you love the podcast and you would like to support the podcast, remember you can head on over to NacheSnow.com and hit shop in the navigation. And that's where you can find all the things, the Life Cleanse Journal to help you discover your passion and just what you want to focus on next. I have it in hard copy and digital form. I also have a digital planner, 30-day planner, and a digital notebook for those of you all who like using GoodNotes and Notability. And of course, I have a few t-shirts over there that are hand lettered. So please, choose. I have a little something for any and everybody. And I even have a few free downloads over there. So be sure to check it out. Okay. So let's get to my guest for this week. So this week I have on Rose Pearlman. For those of you guys, you all know I have multiple Instagram accounts, but for those of you all who also follow at Creative Route, that's where I do like most of my crafting projects, you've seen some of my punch needle projects and you know that I just fell in love with that medium and it's just so much fun and so easy to do and I just absolutely love it. So I do follow a lot of people who do punch needle. Other people call it rug hooking. And Rose is one of those people. And I've always just loved the patterns, her colors, like all the things. So I'm really excited to have her on the show. It's funny. I wish I could show you guys the video. You guys are just seeing the audio. But when we recorded, we actually were looking at each other on video, so we're like cracking up and having a good time. But I think within the audio, you'll just hear that energy because this was like a really fun interview. I'm just been so lucky to have so many amazing guests. But anywho, on this episode, we talk about how she got started and then how it slowly over the last few years developed into a business. We don't really get into the book too much, which is my bad. We were just talking about all the other things. Time started to run out, but she does have a book, Modern Rug Hooking. The kit she has isn't out as of the airing of this episode, but she's working to release it again. And she talks about things that worked and didn't work when you're trying to put together a craft kit. So her story is so amazing. So if you've ever thought about doing one, I think she gives a lot of good lessons learned. And then we just talk about why she gravitates more towards teaching, which led us into a conversation about just selling your work in general and how when it comes to crafting and art, pricing can get really tricky and what people are willing to pay for when it comes to arts and crafts is all kind of a little weird. Because of that, she's made like a conscious choice to focus more on teaching, but there are some exceptions of when she does sell her art, and so we talk about what those exceptions are. And of course, we get into all kind of other random amazing things that I know that you guys will love. So I will stop there and let's just get into this episode. Let's chat with Rose. Here we go. Hello, Rose. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nache.
So before we get into all of the goodness that you do now, Can you just tell the listeners a little bit about you, your background?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in northern Vermont. My parents are artists, they're visual artists, they're abstract oil painters,
Mm.
and we lived in part of an artist residency program. So it was artists coming from all over the world to be at this place to do their work.
Very
So
cool.
everyone I kind of knew was an artist when I was young. And of course, I did not want to be an artist. No, I always saw art as painting or drawing, and I just never thought that I had those talents or that skill or even the patience to do it. I couldn't render, I couldn't draw realistically, and so I think I just pushed it away. But I was always creative. Looking back, I always liked to make things with my hands. It just looked different than what everyone else around me was doing.
Mm.
My mother sold art supplies from our home. She had a store in the house, and
Mm.
so she would get beautiful pastels and paints and pencils and everything you can think of would come into the house. And I would be taking the packaging and using the packaging to like make things and like
Ah.
organize, but also like cut them up and make like functional little items and stuff. So that was kind of my style of making. It was kind of outside the box, and I always thought of it as crafting or inventing, but I never saw it as an art form, especially very different than what I saw around me. And this is in the 80s and the early 90s, and it was very much about if you're a painter or you're a sculptor. There wasn't a lot of mixed media, or even like fiber arts wasn't really a thing that you would see in
Yeah.
galleries, right?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Right. So I had this very kind of narrow vision of what being a fine artist was. However, I did eventually go to school for photography.
Ah.
Yeah, but I always thought it's so different, especially because I didn't know any photographers, and the style I liked was like documentary or
Mm.
street photography, and so it just was more practical to me. I wasn't like a conceptual photographer or anything like that. So that took me to New York City,
Mm.
and I loved it until I think I didn't love it anymore.
Now, were you working in New York City as like a wedding photographer or like, what were you doing while in New York City?
Well, while I was in school, I had the odd jobs. I think I worked at restaurants and stuff. But when I was going to school, it was mostly, I was concentrating on my studies for the
Okay,
most part,
just
and
okay.
it was a fine art degree. But I think it was like senior year that digital came out. I was a black
Mm.
and white analog film photographer, 35
Ah.
millimeter.
Yeah.
So it was its own thing, and it had its own time. And so when digital came along by my senior year, I knew I was not going to be able to compete with what was available in terms of people taking lots of photos all at once. And I wasn't into that transition of
Ah,
taking
okay.
digital. I never was very comfortable with it. And like even the style of photography that I went to school for, I can't imagine like being on the street and taking like just aiming my camera at someone at this point, right?
Right. Yeah, because you have to be someone who loves to do that. Like, I see some videos even out here where people are like in the rain, on the street, taking like these odd angles. I'm like, you have to be committed to that shot, right? You have to
Oh my
have the
gosh,
love for it. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm so shy. I won't even be seen holding a camera. I don't even know what I was thinking or who that person was, because that is exactly not me. So yeah. So a 4-year degree, you just push that one aside, and you kind of figure out what comes next. But after that, I had the odd jobs. Like, it wasn't like a quick finding what I was going to do. It took me a while, but I ended up as a teaching artist eventually. I think around like 2004, I became a teaching artist, which just meant I went into different public schools and museums in the city, and I taught art, but as kind of like it wasn't part-time, but I got to see students for a few times, and I go into another school and see students for just a few days, and so it was never like a full-time teaching gig where
Okay.
you're in it. And that was a great job for me, because it allowed me to explore all of my crafts And
Yeah. Because you have to like try a bunch of different things until you find that one or two, right? That really
exactly.
speak to you. Yeah.
And I was all about that. I mean, growing up or even in my own practice, I just want to try everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And so it was perfect for me because then I did get to have my hands in everything. But the
Mm.
thing about me is like I never went far enough with any one craft to really become knowledgeable or an expert. I just wanted to like skim it enough so I could like make a few things at home, and then I was like on to the next thing. And so
Yeah.
I was really well suited for this teaching job where I got to just come up with these projects and teach the kids. And they were really outside the box, and I enjoyed like coming up with like an easy way I could teach a bunch of school children at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
But
so,
and at
yeah,
this point, you're still in New York, right?
yes,
Okay.
never left.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, never left college.
Oh, okay. Because I wasn't sure if you had like moved out of New York and then moved back to New York, but no, you were okay.
I try every year to get out of New York. No, that's a little bit of a joke. My husband's really like the New Yorker, and I'm like the country girl who still has struggles sometimes with it. Like I'm very grateful for being in this great city, but part of me needs space and the stress. So I've stayed in the city,
Okay.
and that's part of the problem with like my style of crafting and wanting to do everything and living in a very small apartment in New
Mm-hmm.
York.
Mm-hmm.
I think it wasn't very long where I decided like, okay, I can't keep investing in supplies.
Yeah.
Number one, they're expensive, and number two, like there's no place to put them storing things. And so then I really became pared down with how I made things, and I really wanted to make things
Mm.
with less supplies than they say you need. And so,
Okay.
and that was great for my teaching because I would travel into all 5 boroughs and I'd have to bring all the supplies with me in a backpack.
Oh. Yeah.
Sometimes I would see like 200 kids a day.
Oh. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. So how did you get into like rug hooking, punch needle? Did that end up being like one of the projects that you were teaching when you were going to these different places, or was it like something else you picked up on the side?
So, funny enough, rug hooking was something my mother did
Mm.
all through my childhood. So she was an abstract oil painter, but when she had kids, she couldn't get to her studio because of us, really.
Hmm.
And she had a full-time job. And so she needed something so she could translate her style of painting into fiber. And rug hooking can easily translate anything you want to make into a rug because you're just working line by line or punch by punch. You don't have to grid or anything, or there's no very detailed plan involved. You just kind of go at it, right, with painting.
Right.
So, yeah. So I grew up, and there was always like a huge frame in the living room, half done. There was always like baskets of wool and everything. And I did not ever take an interest. Ever.
Mm.
It just was something that was always there, and I had no interest whatsoever in it. It
Yeah.
wasn't until I was like in my early 30s and I had my son,
Hmm.
and I really needed a creative project and kind of a repetitive one, like one that was like
Hmm.
soothing. Like I like to knit, but you can only knit so many sweaters, or at least I could only knit so many sweaters. And I wanted something a little more like creative in terms of color and options. So it was then that it occurred to me like the rug hooking was probably good for me. And my mom sent me like a box of supplies she had with Xerox copies from books and stuff. And that was it. And it suited my lifestyle perfectly because with kids, you never know how much time you have.
Hmm.
Um, so you could have 5 minutes, or you can have an hour, or maybe they take a nap for 3 hours and you don't know what to do with yourself. But in terms of setting up and cleaning up, you just want something that's not a lot of work because you're always cleaning with kids. And so I was just looking for something really, really compact and clean that didn't make a lot of mess, but yet was soothing and you can make things. And the rug hooking really was perfect.
And it's so weird too because I don't know if you run into this, but like when you are into any kind of crafts, eventually you end up with a lot of stuff, right? Where you're like, I have like 10 sweaters now, or I have 10 paintings now, or I have 20 so-and-sos now. Like, here, you take one, you take one, you take one. So did you ever run into that issue when you began rug hooking where you're like, what am I gonna do with all of these projects? Or did you have a place where you could like use and put all this stuff?
Well, that's what was perfect about rug hooking, because I had that problem with everything. I mean, I started painting for a while, and then paintings just started piling up, and I had no place for them. And I thought, no, I don't need to make another painting ever again, because who's going to take them in? And
Right.
right? But with rugs, I really saw it as different, because I don't get tied to the things I make, and to give someone a pillow or to give someone a rug, I think it's easier than giving someone a painting, which just feels so weird and personal. People are like, I don't want this painting, right? But I'll take a rug, or I'll take a pillow.
Yeah.
And so things moved out very quickly. I could always give a rug away, where I didn't feel that about the other projects I kind of did. So I didn't feel like I was storing so much, which I really liked with the rugs. Yeah.
And then just for the people out there, I mean, anybody who like follows me on any account, because I have a lot, you've probably seen some of my projects, and I guess mine is more like punch needle, which is similar to rug hooking, but I just wondered if you could just take the time just to explain what rug hooking is, and is there a difference between rug hooking and punch needle? Is punch needle just like the new 2020 name for rug hooking? But like
Yes, thanks for asking this question, because I think I confuse a lot of people, because I also use punch needle and rug hooking interchangeably, which
I do too.
So I totally get it. So rug hooking and punch needle can be the same thing. Now, rug hooking can also be done with a crochet-like hook, like that's like a short crochet hook, and it makes the same kind of plush loops, but you're pulling loops through the same type of backing cloth to make those little loops. Now, a punch needle came along, so that was invented in like 1840. Punch needle came along in 1880, just as a quicker way of doing it. So instead of having that fine motor skill of like twisting, pulling, you're just like shoving it in, moving
Right.
on.
Which is so I'm really a punch needle person, you guys, because I'm lazy and it's quicker.
Oh, I am too. When I say rug hooking, I am not picking up a traditional rug hook. That is like way too time consuming and labor intensive. Like, no way. Although my mother, she never used punch needles, she used the rug hook.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's as fast as I am, like, with a punch needle.
Okay.
So you can get quite good, but it takes a lot of time. So that's the main difference. But up until it became an internet craft punch needle, people always called it rug hooking.
Anyway, okay.
And they would say rug hooking, maybe with a punch needle, but it was all under the umbrella of rug hooking.
Okay.
And so I've never really made that jump into like, I'm a punch needle artist, or I'm punching. Like, I don't know why. It's just taken me a long time.
Yeah. And I think for me, I probably lean towards more punch needle only because that's how it was introduced to me. And then as I started learning more about the craft, that's when I learned about the term rug hooking. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, is there a difference? They kind of look the same, but it is in the tool. So that totally makes sense.
Yeah. And now, before it became an internet craze, I should say, the most popular tool was that crochet hook. The punch needle was like not popular at all.
Yeah.
So it's just surprising because now it's like hugely popular where no one's ever seen the hook part.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember when I first got into it and you couldn't find a punch needle anywhere. I went to Etsy, I went to all the punch needle folks, everybody's website, and I was like, why can I find the punch needle? It was like insane, and now you can probably find it anywhere. So it's amazing how things like just take off like that.
Yeah, the market, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, there was a shortage of punch needles. I remember my supplier, Amy Oxford, the Oxford punch needle is the one I use, and she was just a small Vermont business. And she said back in like the early 2000s, I think I've sold all the punch needles I'm ever going to sell. Because she never just saw it going anywhere. And then this internet thing happened and they exploded and she just couldn't keep up with demands. And so like
I can
getting a punch needle was like a Willy Wonka ticket. You know, people were so excited because they were like so hard to get.
No, it was super hard to get.
Yeah.
So question for you. So at what point were you like, okay, I think this is something, right? And how did that evolve from you doing it while you're like watching the TV with your son to maybe sharing it on social to teaching workshops about it, right?
Right. Yeah. So it was just one of my many crafts, and I was kind of going through a hard period where like I didn't really know what I was doing or what it was I liked to do or where I should place my energy. And I made myself go on to Instagram and start an account, and I came up with the idea of posting something I made every day for an entire year. And that was like 2016, I believe. Yes, 2016. So it was very recent in terms of this punch needle thing being my occupation. However, I would post things, but every time I posted a punch needle thing, people were really interested.
Yeah.
In it. And that kind of spurred me on in terms of like, oh, well, what else can I make with a punch needle? And so that kind of started me off on this thing of, I was always going to do it, but now I was really trying to think outside the box in terms of what can I show with this tool. It was all about like how to make people realize all of the possibilities that you can do with a punch needle. And so that's really where it started. It was this like 100-day project, which didn't turn out to be all punch needle even at the end. It still had the all the other crafts that I do, and I did and I still do. But the punch needle was definitely, like, I could see that momentum, and I became more and more excited about it. Yeah. Especially because it's like my way of making things and crafting, because there's all the things you can make a punch needle item into, because it's this plush fiber. So there's, like, all the different ways you can make it into bags and cushions and home goods, soft goods, rugs, children's toys. It could keep going and going. And then there's also things. You can combine this technique with other fiber techniques like applique, or you could turn it into all these different looking things. And then, of course, there's like wall hangings. There's just so many categories that you can make with a punch needle. So it had my crafting element of what else can I do with this? What else can I do? And it was also like I was running like any kind of hardware store fiber through it, and materials you can find. And so there's that aspect to it. So it just feels like it's like the technique that keeps on giving. It doesn't. Yeah. I'll tell you what it does. It almost did after when I was like finished with the book. I was like, okay, I'm almost new to print.
You're like, I can't think of anything else I can do with it.
Done. I just needed
all the materials, all the things.
I was like, okay, I think I am maxed out, but obviously I haven't. I just
Well, it's interesting, like, you've been looking at, like, your Instagram account, which I'm pulling up here. And what I love about it is, in which is how I found you, and I was just like, oh, this is so magical, is, you have, like, this consistent look and feel, like it's like you figured out what your style is, which I think sometimes artists have trouble doing. So how did you find, because you do have like a color palette and a type of style with whatever you're creating, right? And so how did you determine what that style is and figure out, okay, this is kind of what I'm gonna put out to the world?
Yeah, well, practice was something. If you want to scroll back to the beginning of Instagram, you could see that wasn't always the case. So it was a lot of seeing what felt right, what looked good. I do have just a natural tendency to use certain colors, certain palettes, but my Instagram is very, like, it's saturated with it has color, but there's lots of light and white space around it. And that's very important to me. I just think it helps to really highlight whatever you're trying to show with that negative space. So I'm very aware of that and sensitive to that in terms of posting something, is just Do you get the sense of space? Is it easy to see
Mm-hmm.
whatever I'm sharing? So that I'm very particular about. And the colors just kind of come together because it's what I gravitate towards. Honestly, like moving into this apartment 3 years ago, I have great light,
Mm-hmm.
which makes a huge difference. I have like
Yeah.
beautiful windows, and it's in New York City rental. The walls are white.
Right.
So you work with what you have, but that really helped in terms of photographing
Mm-hmm.
my work. So one of the things that I do on Instagram is I really kind of curate it in terms of how it looks, and I have a planning app in terms of like gridding it out.
Oh, are you like which one do you use? Like Planoly? It's so many out there. Planoly, Later, UNUM, like, oh my goodness.
I use Preview.
Oh, I've never
Yeah.
heard of that one.
Well, what's great, I've tried some of the others, but they only let you download a certain amount of images at a time.
Uh-huh.
And Preview lets you take in as many as you want.
Ah, okay. No, good to
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I can get a little crazy about like moving those little boxes around. But in my feed, it goes through like bad stages where I'm like, oh, let's just climb out of here, And then,
Right.
but I'm very kind of sensitive to that. But like the curation, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it really kind of helps or hurts. Yeah, and I have to say, I also, if you've noticed, I use a Square Ready, I believe is the name. Yes, and it just puts everything in, like, you can format it so there's a white space around everything.
Oh, around right, because yours has it where either I'll have the space on the left or right or top or bottom. Yes.
Exactly right. And I feel like for something that has a lot of color already in it and a lot of texture on top of that, because rugs have like so much texture that you really just need a lot more space.
Yeah.
But that's just my own, that's my own preference. Sometimes I see a feed that's like has everything on it. I'm like, oh, this is an amazing feed.
Right. And then do you use, I mean, because you did have those years taking photography classes, but do you use your cell phone, like an iPhone or Android, or do you actually use a SLR camera?
So when I signed the contract for my book, that's when I bought like a real camera. But I really resisted up until then. I was just using my iPhone. And so, that was like 2018 I bought that camera. And it's not a very advanced like DSLR. It's just an automatic, but it's a higher quality. And it makes a big difference, I have to say. Like, I was really resistant to it, but it's just a lot sharper.
Oh, that makes sense. Because I do like my iPhone a lot too, but then if I'm doing anything, let's say for YouTube, sometimes I'll use the iPhone, but if I really to be really good quality, I'm gonna use that DSLR video capability, right? Because there is just like a sharpness that even the best iPhone is not. There's a difference, yeah.
There is a difference. There is. Although, like, I love how wide iPhone shot can get.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And when you're using, like, unless you have a certain lens, you're probably going to get a much, smaller frame. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that makes a difference. But yeah.
No, it is. And I've splurged on the iPhone from last year, and that camera is amazing. So I very rarely use my SLR unless I'm really trying to, create something very special. Other than that, I'm like, I throw that iPhone on a tripod. If I open all my shades and everything, that natural light comes in, and I'm like, it's good enough.
Yeah, it totally is too. It really is. I have an old iPhone, but the new ones are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the camera that I use, I should say, it's a compact camera, so it's really small because I knew I just wasn't going to have that big one. I wasn't going to use it. It was just too big. Yeah. And so it's compact, and it has this amazing feature where it's it's controlled by your phone.
Oh, yes.
Which is such like all my step-by-step pictures with my hands in it. Yeah. I could see where my hands are with my iPhone while the
Oh,
camera's taking pictures.
yes.
So it's just a little tip. Like someone gave me that tip about this camera, and it's been so great.
No, that is. I mean, because I feel like, especially with what you do, even getting overhead shots, like I'm assuming you have a special tripod and I don't know, or do you have like a little setup with books or like, how do you do your shots? Yeah.
I am so bare bones. Like I'm always trying to find a way of not like having to buy the thing, right?
Right.
There's
There's
small
more stuff to
apartment.
store. Yeah.
I have like tied my camera up to the blinds. Like I find like, which I don't recommend because like, yeah, I don't recommend that. But I will find a way of like rigging it up or like laying on the floor where it's like above me and something high. But you know, so much can be done without like thinking you need a special studio or special, you know, there's so many things are trying to be sold to you. But yeah, so I don't have anything other than this camera.
Good for you.
I do have like one of those like mini tripods, though, I have to say.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
And then, in question for you, I put something out on my stories where I asked people, like, let me know if you have any questions for this season's guest. And community came up a couple of times. Like, can you ask them how they build their community? So for you, you have like a good size Instagram following and these people who love what you do and respect you and your craft. How did you build that community? What advice would you give to someone starting out? Because I know it's so weird because number one, with Instagram and TikTok and Pinterest and all the things, sometimes it depends on when you get in there and all the things. The algorithm is a certain way, and then once you kind of come in at the tail end, it's like, "Hi, I'm over here."
Yeah.
So any advice?
It's so hard because in the beginning when I started posting, it was really just for me. Like my Instagram feed I just wanted to see the projects I was doing. I wanted to see the progression. Like I needed that the visual motivation. And I threw things up there. I never hesitated, right? I never had pause about like if I'm going to like that in a few years or if someone's not going to like it or how many likes it would get. It was all about like just wanting to see my progression. And the more attention I was getting, the harder it became for me to post. Like the more I was like nervous that people weren't going to like it or I still go through this and it's a mental game. But for the most part, punch needle community and people who are interested in crafts are just such lovely people, right? It's the best kind of community you can create. And so I'm overwhelmed with how wonderful and generous people are. I do try to make my feed resourceful in terms of if you're coming there to learn punch needle, you can see different types. I really like to show people what they can make. Like I'm always trying to like do the new project just so I can show you that it's possible and like if you can use this fiber or you can turn it into something that you wouldn't even think you could do with a punch needle. And so I really try to make, and in my highlight stories, you see, I'm terrible. I don't know my highlights, my safe highlights. Yeah. There's lots of like tips and tricks. And so I really want to make it a resource. And every once in a while, I'll come out with an idea of like how I can just like make a quick post that gives you information, like new information or just repeated information for those who need it. And people are so grateful for that free information. And I feel like that's what keeps people tuning in and checking back for my feed. It's putting out content that's valuable.
No, it sounds simple, but it's not simple, right? But no, spot on. And so question for you, you're like, doing your rug hooking, people are like, we love this, you're building your community. So did you eventually start kind of doing this full time? Do you still teach, but kind of like on the side, do workshops and sell projects? Like, what did your life end up becoming? That sounds like so like dramatic, right? What happened to you? But like how did it evolve?
Slowly, but it's slower than it's fast all at the same time because if you realize, like I've only been doing punch needle intensely for the past 3 or 4 years. So I guess, but honestly, punch needle is my side hustle. It really is because I am full-time with my daughter. And my
Mm,
daughter's 3, and she
mm,
is full time. And
mm-hmm,
so these are all the things. Punch needle is what I do for, like, I just love it so much that it doesn't seem like work.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it's really what I do when I'm not with her, which takes up a lot of time. So I'm working every moment I can. And
Mm-hmm.
when my husband comes home from work, and the weekends, of course, and I'm
Yeah.
always trying to get more time. But it evolved slowly into all my opportunities came from Instagram, and
Mm.
they came like through messages, and so saying yes to anything that came through within reason. So
Right.
keeping opportunities. When I started posting pictures of punch needle, it was a novelty, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
kind of got me through the door. Like no one had ever seen it before, and now of
Mm-hmm.
course the internet is saturated with punch needle. So I'm no longer like, so I have to fight to
Look,
keep.
but you got in first.
I was there first, but it doesn't matter if I was there. Like, who gives you those? Like, no one cares. No one cares. And of course, I wasn't there first because this is like this was
And
invented
it's
in
been going on
1880.
for right, exactly. It's
So
just
I'm
perfect
nowhere near the
timing.
first.
Right. That is true. That is true.
But I was one of the first to have it on Instagram with
Yeah.
my 25 followers. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. But I just try to do different types of projects, have my hands in lots of teaching. I think the teaching really got me out there, and that's where I'm the most comfortable, because people say, oh, why don't you sell your rugs or why don't you sell your cushions? And I'm never comfortable selling my finished pieces,
Mm.
in part because you know how long they take, right?
Mm-hmm. And are people really going to pay the money? Yeah, that's always the tricky part about handmade products. I
So
feel
hard.
like, it just and it depends on the medium. There's some things that are handmade where people are like, "Oh yeah, I should pay," and I'm just, throwing something out there, $500 or $1,000, and there's other things where people are like, "Well, I don't know because maybe I can do that too," and it's like, but can you? And this took me like 3 weeks to make.
Yes. And also the fact that it's a functional item most of the time. I mean, I do
Yeah.
wall hangings, but there's that, like, art can be valued at like crazy prices, right? It hangs on a
Yeah.
wall, but the minute you use something, it can't be that expensive. It's going to
Right.
be used, and so
Right.
there's that craft versus art division a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the wool involved, the cost of wool, the time
Yeah.
it takes, your foundation cloth, and then sewing it into whatever you're making or
Mm.
finishing it. It's just very hard to put a number on it that makes sense in terms of honoring the work you do,
Yeah.
and just, yeah, and making it sustainable. And I know that would burn me out really
Hmm.
fast. So I'm very careful about the commissions I take on. They have to be kind of very substantial commissions, like usually for bigger businesses and things like that, that can afford that type of thing. But then sometimes I have opportunity to do like gallery work, like it could be
Oh,
up.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. I do a lot of tutorials for like magazines, print publications, but my bread and butter is the teaching.
Hmm.
And the teaching went into crafts, went into the kit making, so putting together kits for people to buy. And
Yes, your
that's
kids.
yeah.
Well, I love that because one, I just want to say for the people out there, because I learned this early on with the many side hustles I had. Because I remember even at one point, my mom and I were making handmade bags, and people didn't realize how much time it takes to make a fabric bag. And they were like, well, why are these this price? They're not leather. But I understood why. Like if you go to Target or Walmart and get something that looks sort of handmade and you're paying $10 for it and it's made by a machine, but it looks handmade, it's hard for people to kind of get there, when you're selling something that is handmade that may have taken hours or days to create. And so one thing that I love that you said and talking to a lot of other artists is when they do want to sell their work or their art that's a labor of love, they do it to corporations because or do galleries or things like that because there is, which is weird, I guess. I don't know if I'm saying it wrong, but like more of a not a level of respect, but they just have a bigger budget and then they're willing to actually pay for things like that where someone, you know like maybe me and you, right? Like we're not necessarily going to pay like $2,000 for a piece of art, right? I'm
Exactly.
probably going to say I'm going to make it, right? Like I can make this myself. And so I love that. So that's like I feel like good advice for someone who might want to make their art, but people are only willing to pay $50 when it's really worth $500.
Exactly. And if you price it low, it's undervaluing your work. You're not doing anyone a favor. And it's undervaluing the person who's doing the same thing as you. So it's not doing anyone a service. You have to have a standard for your work in terms of pricing it and go after those big opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than price it low and just kind of get burnt out with kind of production and things like that. But it's hard. I always, with what I do now, I'm always about how can I teach it? How can I make money teaching what I do? If you like the bag I make, well, I'll teach you how to make it,
I love that.
Yeah, and it makes me happier because then I'm also very nervous about sending off something that you have this idea of what this thing looks like and fantasy of it, and maybe the reality of it, you don't even want it. So selling things just makes me so nervous in general. But if you make it, then there's none of that disappointment, and you're teaching someone that skill. It's just it's a win-win, I think.
Before I get to the wrap-up question, and I'm glad you mentioned the kit, because I love the idea about kits, and I feel like kits are another thing that I feel like maybe as a child, kits were a big thing. I don't know. I'm 42 now. So for me, I just remember kits being a thing when I was a little bit younger. Not so much in my 20s and 30s. But recently, I feel like there's maybe late 30s, I guess. There's been all these amazing kits that have come out where you don't have to buy all the supplies because this artist now has packaged this kit for you, which is amazing, right? So how did you come up with the idea and figure out how to, source all the things for the kit so you could actually make a profit for it? Because sometimes you can end up creating something and losing money,
Definitely. So kits I've always liked putting together packages. Mm-hmm. And I think it really started with me going into the schools and coming up with little things for each kid to get. And I was making cardboard looms, cutting them up, and then I warped the warp, I think that's what it's called. So it's ready to go, and winding up little balls of yarn just to make it really efficient, but giving each kid a little tool set. And I just loved that so much. And that turned into a business for a few years of putting together kits for kids. And it was all my kind of creative ideas. And I loved packaging. I loved putting that together. I love a good kit. I have always loved a good kit. And so they were all my kind of zany ideas, very open-ended art projects, but in very tiny packaging. And that was fantastic. I wasn't making any money because the time it took to make each tiny little kit, ridiculous. Right. So that business went, and then I had another one which actually turned into, it's not my business anymore, but it actually turned into a big major business, and it was a kit. And it's a fiber tool and kit. So that was another big project I had before the rug hooking. So I had this history of packaging things and making kits. And so when I was posting pictures of my rugs, Pearl Soho, which is a fiber supply shop, sewing, knitting, and all the fiber crafts, saw me. I don't know. It's all the good things and the curation of it. So good. They saw what I was doing, and they asked if I was interested in making a kit. Which I was like, yes, I am. But I went about it so wrong. I was hand dyeing the rug yarn with my my mother was helping me, and then I was sewing the bags that it would go into.
Because because you wanted it to look good, right? Because you're okay, I want people when they open this to be beautiful, but that's a lot of, that's what you do for a holiday present, or a birthday present or something.
Oh, it was just so ridiculous, the time spent for each kit. And then on top of that, I was wholesaling them.
Oh, and
Which
so
is just
yeah, and
like,
you really have to like have a good price, right? In order to do that, because wholesaling is like 50% of whatever you're selling. So if you're not selling it high enough, that could just be, yeah.
oh, it was ridiculous. And it was like the wrong way to go. And talk about burnout. But what happened with Pearl Soho is that they couldn't keep them in stock. And they had a waiting list of like, I think at one time it was like hundreds of people were on this waiting list because
Oh,
I
wow.
couldn't produce these things that. Of course I couldn't. I couldn't, and I got smarter. I found my rug yarn company, which is amazing. So I quickly stopped dyeing yarn, and of course, like the bags, the sewing handmade bags. Like so, I got better at production, but still, I was doing this from my New York City apartment. Like there was only so many I could do,
Yeah.
and not turn it into just a kit business. Because I know if I just went that route, like maybe it would be profitable, but also maybe I would not want to pick up a punch needle. And I was very much about the education of it and doing it myself because I had so much enjoyment from it. So I just knew I couldn't produce so much. So instead at Pearl Soho, I started teaching their workshops and their classes, and I was selling the kits myself through Etsy, which is a huge profit gain because now it's retail instead of wholesale prices. And I had to sell them for the same price that they were going for at Pearl Soho, which was a huge lesson to me because I was like, I can't ask that much. But if they can ask that much and I wasn't getting a ton in terms of wholesale, then of course I should make up that money when I sell it myself. So for a period of time I was selling to both Pearl Soho and doing my own kits, and it was keeping me afloat because the retail price it was a lot. And that's when it was like, oh, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
In terms of making a profit. My problem then became doing enough production, and I was doing everything by hand, stretching all the frames, cutting the cloth, the whole thing, and from my tiny apartment. So I just recently collaborated with another big business, and they're going to be kitting for me, so doing all of that work for me.
Yay! I mean, it makes a difference, right? Because there's this demand now, and we're gonna chalk that demand up to people getting these beautiful packages, these hand sewn and dyed packages.
So stupid.
But that created the demand. People saw it. They
Right.
probably took pictures of it. They loved it. But now that more people want it, it makes sense. Okay, it's time to figure out
Yeah.
how I
And
can help.
I have to say, because I could only put so many out there at a time, I would mention briefly on my Instagram that I was going to sell at this point, and people were so crazy about getting these kits. They would sell out within seconds, and I would get dozens and dozens of like upset emails
Oh yeah.
about people who were like there at the time and they still couldn't get it because they sell out so fast. So it created this demand because there was only so many I could make,
Right.
which wasn't intentional, of course.
Right, you're like, I'm not trying to do this. People like, I'm really not trying.
Leave me alone. No, I was so stressed out because I really wanted to please everyone and make it available, I get like sad stories all the time. Like, I need this I just feel so terrible. So it just became overwhelming, just the production of it. Yeah. And I needed to scale my business, obviously, but I'm very risk adverse. So this whole time, I should say, with all my projects and everything, like, I don't risk anything. I don't take out money. And which is not always a good thing. I need to like invest a little bit more. Like maybe starting with a babysitter,
Right.
like just like a little house cleaner. You know what I mean? Just like little things.
Yeah.
But I'm all about like just putting in a little money and then getting that investment, and then putting in a little more money and getting that investment back. So very small growth. Very small.
But this is exciting that you found someone you could partner with to help do all the things, right? Because that's the first step. Because even I think about some of the people I've interviewed in the past that we were talking about, and some of them admitted they were like, I had to get a VA or I had to outsource this, because there comes a time where you cannot do it all yourself, and it's kind of giving up that control. But artists hate giving up that control.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, no, I thank you for like sharing that story because I love it because you're still going through it, right? You're still figuring it out.
Oh, I'm not even on the other side yet. It's been a disaster, right? Like, I'm gonna
Right.
get it in a few months, but I think
But
it's
people
coming.
listening, you know, if you cannot get the kit, you know the story behind it. So simmer down, don't get upset. Okay,
But
give her
they're
some
coming.
grace.
They're coming. I swear.
Well, just like a couple of wrap up questions. One is, how do you stay organized? Any tools, software, techniques, anything you would suggest?
Yeah, so I'm all analog. I'm all about paper and
Mm.
pen. Yeah. I mean, even when I was writing my book and doing all the projects for it, I had like a binder, and I would print out photos, like get them printed and like have paste photos in there and just like write notes around. Like I
I
couldn't
love
do
it.
anything on the computer. I just need to see it. I need to hold it. I need that like, being able to access it in a certain way with my hands.
Yeah.
So I'm a big pen and paper kind of gal in terms of writing to-do lists and writing ideas, and it's all kept in like the same journal, and then I move on to the next one. Also, if I was to keep it on like an app in my phone, which I've tried to do, every time I go on to use that app, I get sucked into something else on my phone, and it just
Right.
wasn't working for me. Like I can't go there unless I have to go there with
Right.
the. So I'm very big into pen and paper, which is not so exciting. But I did find two things recently that changed my life.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean, yeah, I'm not even making it bigger than it is. One, one of them was Slidebox,
Oh,
which
I've
is
never heard of
for
them.
photos.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're the type to take a lot of pictures,
Mm-hmm.
um, just organizing those pictures in your
Ah,
phone,
yes.
this app makes it so easy, like by like swiping in one direction, swiping in another direction. Like it just makes it so simple to put
Oh,
all
I'll
your
check it out.
photos into certain, because for whatever reason, I can't even tell you why, but just with your photo app, it's just not so easy to do that. And then you're always searching all your folders.
Oh,
The
it's a
way they
pain.
organize this is beautiful.
Because I have probably 20,000 photos on my phone. And I
Easy.
always thought like Apple, I'm an Apple fangirl, but I'm like, why isn't there an easier way for me to organize all my photos? And I'm like an inbox zero girl. I love everything being very organized and just right. But I feel like my photos are out of control because Apple just doesn't have a good way of organizing them.
Yes, this app is fantastic, and it's free. It's a free app.
Huh.
It's just, yeah, I know. It's really that good because I had the same problem. And every time someone was like, "Do you have a project like this?" or I would spend like hours going through my phone and like trying to get that picture, and then not knowing where they were again. So this is going to save me. It's already been fantastic.
Mm.
Um, the other one I have, because as organized as I feel I am in like my apartment and visual
Mm-hmm.
clutter and all that stuff, I'm a hoarder when it comes to like the tech part of me, my emails.
Yeah.
Last week I had over 11,000 emails in my inbox.
Whoa.
So I'm like a visual, like I'm like a tech, like it's just horrible. I just couldn't believe I was living like that, right?
I know some people love it. I tease some of my friends when I see that little red bubble on their
Yeah.
phone and it has like 15,000. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting stressed just looking at it. But yeah, for me, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I need it to be inbox zero or close to it. It's sad.
Yeah, I just like ignored it. Like I always knew it was current. I was pretty good at responding and being. Once in a while, things would fall through the cracks for sure. But I just didn't ever see a way where I could get through
Mm.
all of those and to make sure that I wasn't getting rid of something that was important. I was a hoarder. I mean,
Email hoarder.
I wasn't fixing anything. so so today I have wait, I have 36 messages in my inbox.
I mean, that's really good. That is good. I mean,
This is from last
11,000.
week to this week.
Did you find an app or did you do email bankruptcy? Because sometimes what I tell people is like, I know, take all the emails in your inbox and put it in like an archive folder and then start from scratch. So they're still there, you can still search, but then you start creating filter systems and folders.
No, I
No.
wanted them gone, gone, gone. I didn't want
Oh.
like storage space for my
Oh,
terrible email.
right. Yes, yes, that is
Oh
true.
no. So I found this app. It's called Chuck.
Oh, that's funny.
I don't know, it's a good name. And I deleted and sorted all of my important emails for years within 2 hours.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
It is so good. And even if you're inbox zero like you are,
Yeah.
just the efficiency of how you can deal with incoming emails just by swiping up, down, and it's just brilliant. Or you can see all the messages by a certain person. It could sort it by subject matter. I mean, it is so good. And to unsubscribe, you just hit a button. So you don't have to go through all the rigmarole of like maybe they take you somewhere else and you're waiting and
right.
yeah, which is a lot of time. So this app is just changed my life.
I love that. I mean,
I know.
people out there who listen to me, they know like may have a problem with productivity. Sometimes I go a little insane. So I will definitely try check out, and
Yeah.
I'll link that in the show notes along with the slide box too. So thank you for sharing those. Game
Digital
changer.
organization. That's my new
Exactly.
goal.
Do you have a hobby? You know? Because I mean it could be rug hooking, but maybe it's something else. I don't know.
Yeah, I do. I have a hobby, a passion, side hustle. I love still making things, and it really is in that category of making things with less supplies, less materials, but really like functional, beautiful objects.
Mm-hmm.
So I love kind of coming up with new ways to make this, and then making tutorials available for how to do those projects with the few items you have in your house.
I am a craft girl. It is a problem. So if I was talking to somebody and they were like, "Well, what is your hobby?" And I'm like, "Well, what isn't my hobby?"
Keep all of them. Never
All the
lose them.
things. All
You
the
keep
things.
circling back and you combine them, and it's adding to something, right?
Right, right.
I'm right there with you.
This was such a great conversation. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, my website is rosepearlman.com, and my Instagram handle is at rosepearlman.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Rose, thank you. Appreciate you coming on to the podcast.
This was so much fun, Nache. Thank you so much.
Well, you've made it to the end, my friends. I have had such good conversations with people this season. I told myself when I started this season that I was going to try to keep episodes to like 20 minutes and fail and fail. But I mean, once I just start talking to people, I just feel like the conversation just gets so good, and I'm able to talk to them about things that I think will resonate with you guys and actually help you all in your entrepreneurial journey. So you guys can let me know if the episodes are running too long or not. I can try to shorten them up next season. But for the most part, I think you guys are loving the longer episodes, but you tell me. I'm always up for honest feedback. But if you're listening to my voice right now, that means you loved this conversation with Rose. And hopefully, it is giving you some ideas on how you can be intentional with your business. If you love this episode, please leave a comment on social media under the card that I'm surely going to post, and rate the podcast 5 stars. And please share it with your friends and family. Sharing is caring. All right. And then for the show notes, if you want to get links to all the apps that she mentioned, please head on over to NacheSnow.com/115, and you can get all the show notes. You can get access to my shop, And if you would love to buy me a coffee at the bottom right, as of the airing of this show, you can buy me a cup of Joe. All right, have a good one, people, and I will catch you guys next week. Take care. Bye.